Oh, there are. I've talked to him about them. He remembers them all down to the last small detail. But Miles, there's no emotion. None.
He must realize that they are not human. They are far too normal. Nobody is that average.
I don't think that's entirely logical. Quetelet has proven that most people are mediocre.
Quetelet, he was an astronomer who observed what is millions of light years away. But it's true, he invented the average man. In fact, he was just waiting for his telescope to be finished in Brussels. As long as it was under construction, he couldn't work as astronomer, which was his passion. So he looked for a new field of activity. Man.
What do stars and people have in common?
The only tools Quetelet knew were mathematical ones. Therefore he applied mathematics to humans. He didn't even ask himself whether this made sense. He just used what he knew. You can use statistics to calculate stars, and that's what he did with people. His problem was that there wasn't much data available at the time. There were hardly any statistics, and they were difficult to access. So he took what was the most readily available. This was the height and weight of people. He invented the body mass index, the BMI. It indicates the ratio of height to weight. This is still used today to classify overweight and underweight.
You see? That's practical.
So far, so good. But everything changed when the revolution broke out in 1830. Belgium was fighting for its independence from the Netherlands. For Quetelet, the revolution meant that the foundations of his observatory were used as a military barracks. The construction was delayed for years, a disaster for him. So he created an ideal of a person who would not take part in the revolution, the average man.
Why is mediocrity an ideal?
Indeed, in the classical tradition, the ideal is always something rare, if not unattainable. Since antiquity, the ideal of beauty has been a body with perfect proportions, a harmony that is rarely found. Quetelet turned the classical tradition on its head.
How did he do it?
He replaced aesthetic and moral judgments with mathematics. He followed in the footsteps of Laplace. He was a student. Let's listen to Laplace.
Let us apply to the political and moral sciences the method of observation upon calculus, the method which has served us so well in the natural sciences.
And the most famous method of Laplace is the normal distribution. There's a bell curve in the middle where the most frequent values lie, and then there are only a few deviations on the sides. It's quite common to find a normal distribution in pretty much any context, including human characteristics. The average person is the person whose values occur most frequently.
Frequent, but average.
For Quetelet, the average man was not mediocre, as we understand it today. For him, all men of genius were also average men. Quetelet began to calculate everything he could find data for. He calculated the average number of people living in poverty and the average age of which of couples get married. He calculated the average annual number of births, the average age people died, and even the average annual suicide rate. He believed that there was a connection between the high death rate in February and the high birth rate in July. The birth rate was so to fill the gap in the population, as if mothers plant their babies to fill a gap in the population. For Quetelet, these differences were the same as the differences in temperatures or rainfall during the different seasons.
That is more objective than the ancient ideal of beauty.
When Quetelet used the term the average man for the first time, he called him a fictitious being. He's just a type, a quantity. In his mind, the average man was directly comparable to the true ratio of black and white balls in a box from which random draws are made. It is a ratio that is approached by more and more draws. Therefore, nature is apparently striving to produce a type. The type can therefore be seen as a perfect model.
I had a lot of questions and no answers. How could Jimmy and Wilma seem so normal now? Surely I had done nothing to cure them. Maybe they wanted me to feel secure, but why?
For Quetelet, anything that deviates from the mean is an error, just as the errors that occur when measuring planets. The error rate can be reduced by collecting a large number of data. Therefore, accurate results can only be obtained by studying many people. He was the first to demand for big data as a solution. But his method can only be used to make generalizations about groups, not individuals. Any deviation from the type in an individual is for him an error.
Oh, what about me?
With the invention of the average man, he has created an abstract idea of man. The human being is no longer an individual, but an element of a set. He invented an abstract mediocrity, from which an individual is only a deviation, an error. Aesthetics and morality are replaced by numbers and are computable. The frequency of a number determines its value. Quetelet was enthusiastic about a system. He called it social physics. In fact, he founded social statistics.
If the average man were perfectly determined, one could consider it as a kind of beauty. All that deviated from what it resembled would constitute deformity and disease. That which did not resemble it would be monstrous.
Quetelet was a visionary.
Not so fast. Quetelet realized that it was not possible to find statistics on good deeds, like courageous interventions. On the other hand, it was possible to produce statistics on crime. This is how he found an application for his method in criminology. His statistics would help to identify criminals more easily. For him, criminals are those who deviate from the norm. For example, he found that a man is most likely to commit a crime at the age of 25. For a woman, it is 30 years. In the summer, people are more likely to be attacked. In the winter, it is more likely that property gets damaged. In those days, revolutions also mostly took place in the summer. It inspired the criminologist Alphonse Bertillon. He developed a system for identifying criminals called Bertillonage. The Bertillonage was officially recognized after it was used to find and arrest famous criminals. At a time when there were hardly any photographs, it was successfully used to produce accurate wanted posters. The system gained acceptance when it helped to arrest the anarchist Ravachol. Identification was not so difficult, however, as he had a scar on his right hand.
But admit it, his method was more precise than that. Through Quetelet, wanted posters were spread.
Quetelet believed that everyone could be divided into two groups, those who were average and those who were not. He believed that the non-average group could become criminal or even start a revolution. With his method, he hoped to be able to prevent crime, but also revolutions, if the probability could be calculated. He saw chance as an illusion, because everything has a cause. He believed that people's lives were just as predetermined as the movements of the planets. He was convinced that it was the organization of a society that determines whether someone becomes a criminal.
It is society which prepares the crime, and the guilty is only the instrument by which it is executed. The result is that an unfortunate person who loses his head on the scaffold or who ends his life in prison is, as it were, an expiatory victim for society. His crime is the result of circumstances in which he is placed. The severity of his chastisement is perhaps another result of it.
Karl Marx admired him.
Don't fight it, Miles. It's no use. Sooner or later, you'll have to go to sleep.
Now it gets interesting.
But eventually, Quetelet stopped working on it. His telescope was finished and he went back to astronomy. And I think my rice is cooked. His invention of the average man was later adopted everywhere, in psychology, sociology, criminology, and elsewhere. Many theories and practical methods are based on the idea of defining people by statistic values, and not as individuals. But that's a topic for other videos. Thank you for watching. See you next time.